Thank everyone for being patient with our delay this evening. So I'd like to call to order the meeting for the Waterfront Commission Design Review Committee, November 14th. First item on the agenda tonight is to vote on the minutes from our previous meeting of August 8th. I'd like to ask for a motion of approval unless there's any questions. Anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
Motion to approve. Second.
Second? Okay, great. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Next item of business is the continuation of the public hearing and vote on recommendation to the Waterfront Commission District on the Metacomet Property LLC's application for its proposed development located at 500 Veterans Memorial Parkway. Does the applicant have a presentation? All right, thank you.
Good evening, members of the Design Review Committee. As you know, my name is Josh Berlinski. I'm with the firm of Darrow Everett. I represent the applicant, Metacomet Development LLC. I believe this is our fifth or sixth appearance before this Design Review Committee in furtherance of the Metacomet the development, which we propose to site upon the site of the former Metacomet Golf Course. This evening, we would like to ask for this committee to make its recommendation to Waterfront for approval of the project. As you may recall, earlier this summer, this committee issued its recommendation for phase one of the project, which was the golf course. In the late summer, they issued their recommendation for phase 1A, which is the maintenance shed located in the southern quadrant. And this evening, we believe we've satisfied the remaining deliverables as it relates to design review purview. And we're going to bring this committee up to speed on all of the outstanding deliverables, including some recent developments over the last few days. And at the conclusion of which, we'll obviously take questions. The team is here for a brief presentation as well. And then we'll seek this recommendation. Just to be clear to members of the public, both watching and here in attendance, it is not our intent, and we will not be asking for waterfront approval at the November meeting. We have a few other procedural steps we need to take following the recommendation of design review. Excuse me. We need the recommendation of the planning board as to the consistency of the proposal with the comprehensive plan for the city of East Providence. We have not yet received that. We also need the approval of the hearing panel as to the 3 variances which we had requested at the onset of this application process, dealing with signage, parking, and fenestration. So, and we are aware and fully cognizant of the fact that we have further procedural hoops to jump through in order to, before we seek the full approval from Waterfront. This is just a necessary and crucial step in that process. And once again, we thank everyone for their patience. We think this process has been both informative and efficient, and has resulted in a more refined and better product. And I'm hopeful that this committee feels similarly. What I'll do now is I think I'll turn it over to John Selly, who is going to, and he and Matt Merva from Bowler Engineering are going to just revisit the project in general, since it's been a number of months since we've seen it, and kind of go over the iterations and the changes that have been made in response to comments and concerns raised by this committee. Following the conclusion of that very brief presentation, Keith Curran from Bowler is here, and he is going to speak about the final steps of the stormwater design, which was an essential part of the project and for which there's been an ongoing dialogue with PAR. And then finally, Mr. Bannon is here from Crossman Engineering. As you know, he's our traffic consultant. And there has been an ongoing and final dialogue with PAR as to the traffic study as well. And he is going to bring this committee up to speed as well. We have some additional reports that I'll review with the committee to just summarize where we are and what remains outstanding before we seek final approval of water. So with your permission, I'll turn it over to Mr. Selly to begin his presentation. Matt Merva will begin the presentation.
You'll get to hear John too, don't worry. Thanks for having us in again tonight. As Josh mentioned, we just want to fairly briefly go through where we've been through this process to kind of summarize some of the highlights. And if you wouldn't mind just clicking through the slides for me, as I ask you to, with this land on the phasing page. One more. Go. So Josh just mentioned the phasing. Obviously, the golf course is complete. Phase 1A is the maintenance that we've discussed already. So phases 2 and 3, we've been continuing to focus on. If you click to the next slide, this shows the plan as it now currently sits through the process we've had here and through working with peer reviewers and yourselves. And I'll just quickly highlight some of the aspects that have been modified through the process here. If you click to the next slide. Generally speaking, we've provided additional information on lighting types and location, specialty paving materials, plant lists, locations for EV stations, bike racks, and potential solar locations as well. If you click to the next slide, we put some focus on this town center aspect of the project and took some great feedback through the workshop process and through this process to enhance that design, to make it more pedestrian oriented and public facing, incorporating small shop retail and amenity spaces. We also made some modifications to the pathway in the 100-foot buffer along Veterans Memorial, both widening the path to accommodate bike travel and also cleaning up some of the pedestrian connections and eliminating the roundabout that we discussed that was in the pedestrian pathway, making it a more clear path of travel for bikes and pedestrians. Next slide. We looked carefully at the buffering to the rear of the grocery store, provided an augmented berm and screening to help buffer the view to the loading area. We think we've come up with an effective design with the help of the commission here. Next slide, please. We also looked at the alignment of that entry drive to try to make it a little more curvilinear and park-like entry. You see some renderings of the proposed views up and down that entry there. We think that's a nice enhancement to the plan and glad to include that. Next slide. We also re-looked at some of the buffering and provided for some additional landscape islands within the parking area of the grocery, provide some more buffering to the east-west boulevard connector. We also looked at stepping the massing of the garages from sort of one single monolithic building into a series of garage structures that break up the massing and provide for a little more visual interest there. We looked at the intersection at the four-way connection to the more residential entries of the site and made that feel more like an entry to the residential that you were crossing into rather than a continuous road leading right through that residential. We did that through use of landscape, specialty paving, and wayfinding in that area. We also realigned the residential buildings in this zone here to create some space for additional streetscape along the north-south connection. So that was an enhancement that came out of this process. And then sort of an alignment and connection at the pocket park that we're providing along Lion Ave to make a more direct connection up to Pierce Park and Jones Pond. And then we discussed additional understory planting along the buffer at the 4th Street edge of the maintenance employee parking area. There are spaces there for employees. We're providing additional landscape in that zone. And then we opened the golf course, which I think a lot of people have probably seen, but we were able to get that concluded this summer, open for business and open to the public, which we're obviously very excited about. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John Selly and just kind of run through some of the architectural components. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, John Selly with Phase Zero Design. In a similar way that Matt just shared some of the highlights, some of the outcome of the good productive discussion that we've had with you all on the site design side of things. I want to hit some of the highlights on the architectural or building concept side of things. I think we had a lot of good, quality discussion, and some of the feedback that we received from you all that we were able to incorporate into the project. I think, as Josh mentioned at the outset, really did, enhance the product overall that we're delivering with this development. So we've been happy to work through that process. So some of the themes that we discussed, one, certainly that a lot of these buildings that we're proposing on this development are seen from multiple different sides. So we really have to pay attention to the 360-degree design of a lot of these buildings, especially in this town hall or this town center area of the developments. That's something that we remain focused on and will remain focused on as we get deeper into more detailed design. But some of the things we understood from you all, we need to pay attention to where, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, HVAC equipment is being located. How are we screening that from view? So we came up with some strategies. One is illustrated on the slide up here, which is the roof well that we incorporated into the mixed-use building that you see here on the slide, which is the building. It's a reminder, it's the golf operations and food hall building that sort of anchors that town center area. So we developed the strategy of that roof well to help conceal the mechanical equipment. We took similar strategies on the other retail and restaurant buildings in the town center area, and also looked at the larger multifamily residential buildings for how that rooftop equipment would be screened. And that information was developed into roof plans that were incorporated into the updated design set that's been submitted as we've gone along the process. Next slide. Thank you. Another series of comments that we received had to do with some of the larger multifamily buildings having a roof line that was a bit too static. So we went back to the drawing board a bit on those and developed an approach that you see on the screen here that gave a little bit more variety, a little bit more relief to those roof lines on the larger buildings. And again, we incorporated that into the documents that have now been submitted. Next slide, please. We took a look at solar strategies for the buildings throughout the project. Some areas were more promising than others, but we do plan to implement those strategies where they make sense economically. Next slide, please. And also a comment on the garage buildings that help screen some of the residential parking from that boulevard. As Matt mentioned, we broke that building up from one long building into a series of smaller buildings. Took some great feedback from you all to even simplify those buildings, bring the scale up and down, make them more pedestrian appropriate, and again, just enhancing the overall design. So in addition to some of these more aesthetic, a little bit more visual updates to the architecture that we've made, we've also been working behind the scenes with our engineering teams. We made preliminary selections for all the HVAC equipment for all of the buildings across this site. That information was fed into the noise study that's been provided. We also worked with the fire protection engineer to develop fire flows to all the buildings for the sprinklering of the buildings, and that information was fed into the hydro analysis that was done for the site. So good, robust engineering, that's been behind these sort of pretty pictures that we've been sharing with you as we've moved through the process. But in general, we're just, extremely excited to see the project move forward. Really excited for this town center area. It's going to be a vibrant, active space for not only the residents of the property, but also a welcoming, zone of activity for everyone in East Providence to come and enjoy. So again, thank you all for your time tonight and throughout the process. I'm going to hand it over now to Keith to discuss the review comments. Thank you.
Keep covering the folder. So through this process, there have been some comment letters that we've received, some from the fire department, one also from the police department. So we replied to those comments, and the big things that came from those was did a water capacity analysis and fire flow demands. So in that report, they wrote on how that we'll be able to handle those domestic demands and also the fire protection demands with a proposed future city plan extension and upgrade of Vines Ave Also, for phase two, would have to do some off-site improvements instead of building lines to the intersection of Bentley. Again, in that, before we talked about both the fire flow and the other thing that came into the engineering department was one about sewer. There was an existing 10-inch PVC sewer line on the site that doesn't be used. We also went through and actually did CTV on that, and it was actually in pretty good shape. So it would need to be lined, but the idea is to use that existing 10-inch line that goes down to Parkway. And we have shown in calculations that the proposed development, even with all these uses, actually that line can handle the flow that would be coming from the development, both phase one and phase two. We spent phase two and phase three, I should say. The other thing was we've gone back and forth with R, who has reviewed stormwater a few times. I responded to the initial letter back on November 4th. They provided updated comments just actually yesterday. I actually saw it today. There's only 3 minor comments left to address, which we can handle. So again, all the main issues have been addressed. And then as part of condition and so forth, we can address those minor comments. That's all I had. Paul, you want to speak about that?
Good evening, Paul Bannon with Crossman Engineering. I'm just going to go through the chronology of the traffic peer reviews that were completed. We had submitted our report back, initial report back in late December of last year. And then the city retained R to do a peer review of that report. Since that time, they've submitted letters to the city on May 15th from our original report, October 16th from our report revision, and then just today for our final responses. The initial May 15th review was of the December report. As part of that, we revised our initial report and submitted that in September. With that report, we had submitted our initial responses. That included 17 responses to the initial 22 comment. The October 16th review letter was substantial conformance with what we had done with the revised report. So we only had to respond to 4 comments of the 20 comments because we had addressed all the others. The November 14th letter, which we got today, confirmed that we had only addressed all their comments. So at this point, we're complete with peer review and no further responses are required with FAR. At the state level, we received a March 18th letter from the department reviewing that same December report. We then worked responding to those comments. June 21st, we received conceptual approval of that preliminary physical alteration permit that will allow us to move forward with the design and formal permitting with that proposal. To summarize where we are with the city, the city planning department had prepared a memo with both stormwater and traffic. The outstanding traffic comments were specific to the October 16th PAR review. Of those, there were 8 comments that the planning department referenced. Only 3 of those required formal responses to PAR for this latest approval. Most of them, a lot of the 8 were overlapping, and there were several issues that we need to look at going forward. One included supplemental studies as the project is built out. So we've agreed in previous hearings that we would complete supplemental studies as determined by the city. The 2 other items, one is a final design item. Both the state and had concerns with. It's the driveway access on such as North Parkway and left turns, are agreed that the Department of Transportation will determine the appropriate treatments and will work towards that end and keep the city updated. The final one was an additional crossing at the trailhead or amphitheater area on the Parkway. That was one of the final comments from FAR. We responded to our concerns on that. And with this most recent letter, they've agreed to our concerns and approach to that treatment area with the amphitheater.
Does anyone on the commission have questions on any of the three presentations we just heard?
Didn't understand. Is there now a crossing at the amphitheater or no? It's proposed.
We raised concerns relative to the speed and geometry of the roadway in that area, and we made recommendations to, because of the topography of the road and the amphitheater, there's natural screening, and right now there's trees and a fence there. So our goal would be to enhance that screening and do some form of, create a non-attractive area that people see and would want to go to. So through landscaping and fencing or wall type thing, we would treat that area to avoid people.
To encourage them to go up to the roundabout.
Yes, through wayfinding signage, also that we would work with the department.
Any other comments? Ms. Berlinski?
Thank you. There's another deliverable which just came in, which I'm going to speak about, and then I think Mr. Borges might have some thoughts on this as well. As I think that both this committee and Waterfront requested, and in response to concerns raised by the public, we asked the fire department to weigh in on the hydro analysis, as we called it, which was the sprinkler capacity and the water capacity, as well as the public safety impact study. Because as many of you recall, that study utilized numbers and figures that the fire department had in fact provided. So yesterday, we received Chief Carey's response, which I believe was sent directly to Mr. Fazioli, and we'll make sure it's posted to the website tomorrow if it's not already there. But briefly, I just want to summarize his findings and just in full disclosure as to what's going on. So as it relates to the public safety impact study conclusions, Chief Carey, with the assistance of his department, ran through a series of projections based on calls for service at comparable developments, both assisted living, senior living, and market residential. And his conclusion is that there would be more calls for service once the development is fully built out than the public safety impact study predicted. I believe the public safety impact study predicted upwards of 400, and the fire department predicts, if everything's built out and again, extrapolating through current trip generation and calls for service, in excess of 650. So, which is fine, and we accept those findings. We're really not in a position to rebut his methodology. I spoke with Chief Carey about his findings last night upon receipt of the report, and the point that he wanted to convey is that this is obviously just projections, and we'll see how it plays out over time. He did make note of a corresponding cost adjustment in terms of municipal services as a result of that heightened call for service generation. And again, you'll see this from the letter if it hasn't already been posted. And Chief Carey estimates that once the development is fully built out, that the additional cost for service could run up to $2.7 million, which consists of $2.5 million in personnel costs and $200,000 in associated infrastructure. And that is, and the $2.5 million per Chief Carey is 5 firefighters. and the $200,000 is associated infrastructure or whatever the accommodations those firefighters might require. We accept those conclusions as well. And as you may recall from the fiscal impact analysis that was submitted back when we first started this application process, and then it was revisited and subject to peer review over the summer, the project is projected to generate in excess of $4.9 million of revenue in taxes a year. So as I confirmed to Chief Carey, and as I told him I would relay to this committee this evening, that taking his extrapolation and his projections as to what the additional costs are to the city, and there is more than enough revenue to accommodate that cost. And we appreciate the fire department taking the time to make that analysis and that projection. And again, it jibes very well with our fiscal impact statement, which shows that there's sufficient revenues well in excess to service both fire and rescue, as well as any other municipal adjustments that might be required or might come into play as a result of this development. So thank you to the chief for that. We appreciate his candor in saying that he thought that the public safety impact study was a tad conservative, and we were going to wait and see how this plays out. Along those lines, one of the things that we've discussed is after phase 2, which, as you may recall, is the entirety of the commercial component plus a portion of the residential, is that we are going to run an updated public safety impact utilizing actual calls for service, as well as adjusted personnel costs, to make sure that we're on track with the chief's projections and that the costs for the future build out are still captured within the projected revenue of the project. We're talking, obviously, as you all know by now, about a 10-year build. We are sensitive to cost escalation, and maybe it's lower, maybe it's higher, but we want to make sure that it's nothing that the city can't afford and that this project doesn't pay for and then some in terms of the stress upon municipal services. So I want, again, this letter will be available on the website. We appreciate the approach and the analysis that went into it, and we're comfortable and confident that the project financially can support that obligation. The second element of the chief's report was with regard to what we're calling the hydro analysis, which dealt with the sprinkler and water capacity. And the fire department confirmed sufficient capacity to sprinkle all the residential buildings and the developments, and also added as a requirement to the fire department's buy-in of the project or approval, however you want to phrase it, that the entirety of the water infrastructure be installed at the onset of the phase 2 development. We had previous conversations with Public Works and engineering with the city of East Providence as to phasing that and maybe doing simply a taps off of Lions for the phase 2 and then sequencing phase 3. We agree, we understand the city had concerns about this approach as well. We agree to install the entirety of that infrastructure to the fire departments and departments Public Works satisfaction as part of that phase 2 build out infrastructure. So what that will look like exactly, there are a couple different permutations of that. And that's what further engineering and exchanges with the appropriate city departments will entail. But conceptually, my client has confirmed that we agree with that condition. And if it's, public safety takes precedence, if that's what it takes the fire department to get comfortable with this project, as well as the Public Works and the appropriate corresponding city departments to get comfortable with the project, so be it. Like we are more than willing to accommodate that request. So Dan, I don't know if you wanted to speak a little further as to that requirement.
No, I just think, for the record, we have been in constant contact with Marshall, with Josh, Paul Pisano, in discussions, and we did have some concerns with just having that connection on Lyon Avenue. So it is good to hear that they are willing to include that as part of the phase 2. I think not only for the fire department, but also for water quality, it's going to make a big improvement, particularly on phase 2. So I think it makes sense. You're providing, 2 sources of water to this site, which is exactly what the fire department and the water department would want ultimately.
I don't know if there were any other questions before I move on. Mine. So I'm going to conclude briefly tonight by at one of the prior meetings, I think in June, we generated this list of open items that it was incumbent upon us to deliver before we sought full waterfront approval. And there were numerous elements, so I'm going to go over the status of them and discuss them and just bring it up to speed. And again, this checklist will form the basis of why we believe we've satisfied our obligation. So the first is the archaeological, and I do want to speak about that because I'm sure it's on people's mind. So as I think members of the public and this committee might know, and that there is ongoing work being done at the property to confirm whether or not any portion of the site is archaeologically significant. So there was a phase 1 survey done this summer, which was inconclusive in that regard. So as a result of which, as Deb Cox from PAL spoke, the recommendation was made to do what's called a phase 2, which is a more intensive process. And the purpose of this determination, the purpose of this investigation rather, is to determine whether or not any portion of the site is of archaeological significance. So I just want to recap briefly what Ms. Cox said at past meetings, which is that there was no evidence of human remains found during the phase 1 survey. She explained how soil consistency is actually determinative of whether or not remains would be on site. That soil did not disclose any such findings. There have been 2 weeks worth of more invasive testing of the site, and there is still no evidence of human remains. That conclusion remains intact. The ongoing work, we can all see where that portion of the work is taking place right now. It's parallel to Veterans Memorial Parkway. I just want to remind members of this committee and that there is a 100-foot undeveloped buffer along Veterans Memorial Parkway, which was a condition of the zone change. So we are determining whether or not that portion of the site is of archaeological significance, simply for connotation. But again, there's no proposed development contemplated at that portion of the site anyway. There are other portions of the site in which additional testing is going to be conducted. That testing is scheduled to commence in a few days. As we assured the full waterfront and I relate to design review, Deborah Cox will appear upon the conclusion of all the testing. She will produce a written summary of what took place and the findings. We are cautiously optimistic is that we are on the right path and that the archaeological is going to confirm findings that the majority of the site is not of archaeological significance, and the portions that are going to be subject to review. I'm going to explain what that means in 1 second. I also wanted to point out for the Design Review Committee's benefit that at the request of the Narragansett tribe, we performed additional phase 1 surveying outside the initial identified areas. And that surveying confirmed PAL's initial identification of the key areas, meaning that there was not sufficient artifact or product or findings to expand the footprint. So rather, the areas that PAL had identified tentatively in the winter and then again in the summer remain the areas that we're focused upon. So, we are continuing to work through those, and obviously we need to abide by whatever state historic recommends along those lines. I just want to provide a little bit of context as to how that process takes place procedurally. We need a CRMC approval, as I believe this committee knows. An element of CRMC's permit is federal, that assent. It triggers section 106. And as part of that federal designation, they need to obtain a recommendation from the State Historic Commission that the site complies, or that there's any recommendations or there's any actions that need to be taken. In turn, the State Historic Commission is required to interface with the recognized Tribal Historic Preservation Office, which in this case is the Narragansett Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And I can assure members of this committee that representatives of that office have been present at each and every testing and surveying and took place this summer, as well as the subsequent testing that's going on right now. So that work is ongoing. But so the goal of archaeological surveys, as I said, is to determine if a significant site is present. If one is found, State Historic may recommend any number of actions. But as it's private property, the options are limited because there's a certain right to build. But there are conditions to approval. It can be anything from marking a certain location as important, as significant, to a salvage excavation, depending on the nature of the finding. Again, the whole trajectory changes if there's human remains, but again, no indication of human remains to date. The tentative conclusion remains in place. The presence of an archaeological site is unlikely, if not to prohibit development of any type on private property. Having said that, what I wanted to convey to this committee and what will be conveying to full Waterfront when we go before them for the approval is that whatever that recommendation is of State Historic, my client is prepared to comply. Again, the most extreme requirement would be a salvage excavation. We will adhere to that requirement and work with the Narragansett Historic Tribal Preservation Office to ensure that's done in an orderly and respectful manner. We don't know whether or not that's going to be the case. We have further testing to do, but the archaeological is what it is. We're confident that the project is in a position to proceed without, and again, we won't go to full Waterfront for their approval without the report from Deborah Cox to the commission rather, that as to what the program is and what the plan is there and what the tentative recommendations would be. So I just wanted to explain where we are with archaeological. We do believe it's our opinion that it's far enough along to at least get the recommendation from this committee. So that's a long-winded explanation on where we are from an archaeological. Architectural plans, we had previously received, I think, a tentative approval of what we had submitted from Mr. Selly in that regard and incorporated certain comments from Glenn and Sarah. And we also received the recommendation from Phase 1A back in August. Landscaping and engineering, updated landscaping plans had been previously revised per DRC comments. We are completed and delivered those in June. The hydro analysis confirming utility capacity. The analysis was complete. It was reviewed by the city, and we received the affirmative sign-off conceptually as to installing the entirety of the water infrastructure from DPW, and we also received comments from the fire department. As it relates to stormwater, as Keith mentioned, there had been an ongoing exchange with PAR Engineering since last month. We received PAR's latest comments yesterday, which have gone from a list of 36 to 3. We consider those ministerial. We will obviously adhere to those recommendations and get PAR the information they need. We also sought sign off from the fire department. We got their comments to the public safety impact assessment, and we also received their sign off on the hydro analysis, subject to our obligation to install the entirety of that infrastructure. With regard to the fiscal analysis, we submitted that back in the spring. We had it revised following comments we received from the public and full Waterfront. It underwent peer review, and its findings were confirmed. The noise study, we submitted an initial noise study in the spring. We had it updated, as John mentioned, this summer. We received a few comments from the commission and members of the public, which our consultant then answered. We believe that the noise study component has been satisfied to the commission's satisfaction. And we understand that there's certain elements of that we are prepared to address going forward, including most notably that, again, upon completion of Phase 2, we volunteered to provide an updated noise study before commencing Phase 3 to make sure that all the projections and the noise calculations are trued out or within the constraints of that projection, to make sure that there's no misunderstanding and that we are not building anything or imposing upon the surrounding neighborhoods constraints or issues or obstacles that were not contemplated. And if they were, and the prognosis was incorrect, then we obviously are prepared to address them. But we want to do that in sequence in order to make sure that our projections stay intact. Then the traffic and offsite improvements, as Mr. Bannon indicated, we received that initial sign up from DOT June 2024. The power engineering peer review, they signed off on both on the Vaness study from 2023, as well as the Crossman supplement and its corresponding deliverables. Today, we received PAR's correspondence in which they agreed with the entirety of Mr. Bannon's comments and proposals as it relates to traffic and offsite improvements. We appreciate all the effort that PAR put into getting this done within the time constraints that have been laid out before them. And then the last deliverable was that we'll make a good faith effort to see whether or not we could obtain a letter from Scenic Roadways consistent to the one we got from DOT. Scenic Roadways is a quasi board. It meets in public, open meetings. It can only act upon submitted applications. We don't have an approved project within which to submit an application. So we are unable to obtain the corresponding letter from Scenic Roadways. I do want to highlight for this committee, as well as members of the public, that once the application does go before Scenic Roadways, that is a public meeting. There is an opportunity to comment and participate in that process. And we look forward to eventually getting there and letting that play out. So again, our opinion is that we have satisfied these criteria to the extent that they are applicable to design review or they have design components to it. I want to thank all of the experts and members of the committee for their insight and their questioning. It made us better and it made the project better. And we believe we've satisfied the obligation to obtain a favorable recommendation. As I said at the beginning of the night, this is just another step in the process. We have to go before planning for the comprehensive plan recommendation, the hearing panel, and full waterfront. And we are not seeking waterfront approval next week. We know we have a few obstacles, and we need to complete the archaeological so that Deborah Cox from Powell can deliver her final report. So the last thing I'll say is I know that there was a recommendation and a memo from the planning department that I assume that Keith will speak of. But other than that, I thank you for the time. I thank you for the effort, and we're obviously here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. While this is fresh in our mind, thank you for the detailed review of the open items. I know over the last, I think we started this in March. We've had several long, detailed meetings where we went through each and every individual line item of the recommendations and discussed them. And as we moved through the process, a lot of them dropped off the list because we felt the items were satisfactory in their responses. So the items that are in front of us here are reflective of, at least of my notes, the items that we still had to talk about. And I appreciate you, updating this and giving us an update on each of those. We have the opportunity now to as a committee discuss these items because basically all the other items that are on the requirements have been satisfactorily submitted, in my opinion, and I'd like to get the opinion of the rest of the committee to see if there are other items that are not on this list that we feel the applicant hasn't been able to satisfy.
I don't quite understand the process of where or if we have responsibility to assign it.
We have no responsibility to sign it, other than the variance. Like, we can't comment on the name, but we can comment on signage, and they're applying for a variance. That's one of the variances that would be part of the, there's three variances. One is signage, one's parking ratio, and the other one is the fenestration percentage. So signage would be an item that
Not come back to us.
they have to, there was a, goes to the hearing panel, sorry, thank you. Is there any other ones? Okay, well, thank you.
That was going to be the same question I was going to have with regards to what was mentioned before, needing to go in front of the hearing panel and the signage being one of them. So that was a question that I had.
Thank you. Like to take this opportunity to open the meeting up to the public. Does anyone have any comments? Come on up. Just state your name and for the record, yeah, we know you are, but
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Dan Bodwin's my name. I live at Kettle Point in East Providence. I heard something about the traffic tonight that was reinforcing where the traffic studies will be done as the development happens, and I think that's a very positive thing. And now I heard something about the same with noise, and I think that's a very positive step that the developer has agreed to take. My question is it's kind of narrow, but then it also gets to jurisdiction. It gets to the city council zoning approval. They had a condition there, condition number 7, that says the property owner will integrate paths throughout the development, constructed and maintained at their expense, providing for connectivity between the property and the abutting neighborhood. And these paths include pedestrian paths to both the parkway for access to the bike path, as well as Pierce Field, as shown on the plans as submitted, and as shown on the plan as approved by the city. So there's one jurisdictional question. Have the paths been approved by the city? What is the city? Is it the Waterfront Commission? Is it the zoning officer, since this is a zoning provision? The paths that are attached to the zoning ordinance that was approved are very much different from whatever paths we've seen up here. So that's just a question. Who gets to approve the paths in accordance with the zoning ordinance? The specific concern is that the 4th Street neighborhood was supposed to have pedestrian connectivity into the project. It's a good idea, right? But the plans that I've seen don't show that unless I'm missing something. It looks like they have the emergency access, but there's no provision for the pedestrian access so the neighborhood can come into the project as opposed to having to walk around or go over to the city-owned property at the corner. So that's a question. Should there be a more refined, defined pedestrian access coming from the 4th Street neighborhood? And then the other one is a jurisdictional question. Who gets to approve the plans? Because they're different from what is attached to the city council zoning amendment.
is there any other comments? Okay, applicant? No. Okay, I'd like to close the public meeting. Yeah, close the public meeting right now. Correct that public comment portion of the meeting. So based on our recent findings tonight and upon interaction with our legal counsel, I'm going to hand out a motion that was prepared by legal counsel with input from the applicant for our committee members to review and discuss. So the motion that was prepared by legal counsel and with input from the applicant outlines conditions for recommendation to the Waterfront Commission. There are 10 items on here. I'm going to read them into the record for so that we can have them as part of the meeting minutes. We'd like to discuss them as a committee here, and then we'll make a decision on whether we're going to act on an approval or a recommendation for approval at tonight's meeting. So the motion reads, motion to recommend approval to the Waterfront Commission for the Metacomet redevelopment project with findings that the project is in conformance with the reviewing criteria set forth in section 19477 of the East Providence zoning ordinance and the purpose of Article 9, Waterfront Special Development District, DRC. Districts. DRC has considered the application along with the public comments as well as the applicant's testimony and supporting materials submitted to the DRC throughout the course of public hearings. Recommended conditions of approval are as follows. Planning Board recommendation on consistency with the comprehensive plan. Hearing panel approval of 3 required variances for monument signage on Veterans Memorial Parkway, parking ratios, and fenestration percentage. Updated noise, traffic, public safety studies upon the earlier, updated noise, traffic, and public safety impact studies upon the earlier to occur of the completion of Phase 2 or the commencement of Phase 3. Didn't read very well, sorry. That proposed roundabout contained a pedestrian walkway allowing for access to East Bay Bike Path contingent upon approvals from all state agencies. That a construction management plan be developed by the applicant submitted prior to commencement of construction of Phase 2. The applicant shall hold an informational meeting with members of the public to discuss the proposed construction management plan following its submittal to the city. That the applicant comply with the directives of the Rhode Island Historic Preservation and Heritage Commission in connection with and response to the archaeological inspections conducted at the property. All interior roadway construction and utility infrastructure located both inside and outside project boundaries will be subject to the approval of the East Providence Department of Public Works, Water Department, and Engineering Department as applicable. The applicant shall utilize condominium homeowners association agreements satisfactory to the commission, and that will include, but would not be limited to, the following: maintenance of landscape, streets, stormwater basins, and utilities, trash removal, public access, and open space. The applicant will identify pre-qualification services and ongoing certification needed for the project for the provided on-site 10% affordable housing. The applicant will receive final approval and necessary permit assent from the state agencies, including Rhode Island Department of Transportation, the Scenic Roadway Commission, and the Coastal Resource Management Council. Sorry, that was a lot of reading right there. Do we have comments from the committee regarding these items, and do we feel that anything is missing?
Is it clear on item 4 that the roundabout is the one that's on the parkway, not the roundabout that's in the development?
We can adjust that so that the proposed roundabout on Veterans Memorial Parkway.
It helped me.
Sure, absolutely.
We talked about the water infrastructure being in place, all at Phase 2. You think that's adequately covered in number 5, the construction management plan, or do we need to call that out?
I also think it's covered in number 7. And 7 talks about all interior roadway construction and utility infrastructure located both inside and outside of the project boundaries, subject to approval by the City of East Providence Department of Public Works, Water, yada, yada. Do you feel that picks that up?
So,
We can add some additional language in one of them if you felt more comfortable. Sure. We can include them under the list of the agencies. We're going to add the fire department to the list of agencies in number 7.
In number 5, apologies if I missed it, submitted to the city, is that a specific department, or how's that going to work? Or is that the city, is that the list of the agencies there on number 7?
Who the management plan would be submitted to. So I would imagine would be to the building department. And the building department would be involved with the administration and observation of that construction plan. So we can add that to East Providence, City Building Department.
And I think this was already asked before, but I have to ask again, specific to number 2 or anything else here, if some of these don't go forward, especially with number 2 for the variances, does that have to come back to this committee to design review, or how would that work?
I believe depending on what comes out of the hearing panel, we'll have to see what those recommendations are.
Okay. So,
And if it is a redesign element, then it's going to need to come back through us.
understood.
Yep. Since it's my first time through this process, so bear with me.
And number 8, I think it states they're satisfied to the commission. I think it's self-explanatory, but that's the Waterfront Commission, correct? Is that, okay.
Definitely add Waterfront Commission there.
I think it would also make sense to probably include, we are being specific with departments for number 5, the fire department as well.
Building and Fire Department. Definitely with the construction management plan, they should be involved as it affects their calls, et cetera, within this construction site. We have any other comments?
I would say just only other comment would be on number 7 regarding utility infrastructure. I'm not sure if the client wants to, I don't think it makes sense to be specific with all utilities, but I think we're all under the impression that it would be underground and above ground utilities, including electric fixtures that would meet, city streetlight standards and whatnot. Okay.
Let's add underground and above ground utilities. We have any other additional comments? Okay, so I'd definitely like to thank everyone for the several months of meetings that we had here. I think, as Mr. Berlinski mentioned, the project is better for it. I believe that we've done our best to accommodate the public comments as well as the applicant comments. And I think that the overall impression of this process was a good one. It took a while. So what I'd like to do is call for a motion to close the longest DRC meeting in the history of DRC meetings. And I'd like to entertain a motion from someone on the committee to close the public meeting.
Motion to close the public meeting?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. I'm sorry.
Aye.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Ayes have it. I'm sorry. All against? Ayes have it. So now I'd like to ask for a motion from the committee reflective of our previous discussion and the edits made to the written motion that's in Mr. Levy's hands right here. So I'd like to just go through the comments that we discussed. Item 4, we're going to add on Veterans Memorial Parkway after roundabout. On number 5, we're going to add building department and fire department at the end of city's building department and fire department. Number 7, we're going to add above ground and underground utilities. And then at the end of 7, we're also going to include the fire department after engineering department in that item. Number 8, we're going to denote the Waterfront Commission on the second line. That completes the edits that I wrote down during the meeting. Did I miss any of them? Well, they're in there, but We didn't change them. Yeah, there's a second one. I'm just noting that. Yep. I'm just noting the changes we made to this written statement. And that's, so basically, we want to entertain a motion based on the edited version of the document that's in front of all of you here. And I just reviewed those edits. So I'd like to ask for a motion from a committee member for the edited motion that's in front of you.
Motion for the edited,
To approve.
motion to approve
Yeah, it's
the edited.
motion.
Motion.
Yeah. It's this motion in there too many times, but it's motion to approve is the beginning of the statement. So we have a motion to approve from Dan,
Second?
second from Chuck. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Motion passes. Last item for tonight is to call for an adjournment. So I have a motion for adjournment.
Motion for adjournment?
Second.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Ayes have it. Thank you very much for coming out this evening and for helping us through this process. We still have the Waterfront Commission to go, so there's still some more work to do, and we hope we can still get comments and work through this process as a team. Thank you. Have a good night.